Rebecca had always pictured herself rocking a baby to sleep. She'd imagined late-night feedings, first steps, and tiny shoes lined up by the door. For years, she'd dreamed of becoming a mother, and in her mind, that meant starting from the very beginning. But life has a funny way of changing our plans. It was a Saturday morning in March when Rebecca walked into the community center downtown. She wasn't even sure why she'd come. A coworker had mentioned something about a foster care awareness event, and Rebecca had nothing else planned for the weekend. She told herself she was just curious, just looking, just supporting a good cause. The room was full of information booths and volunteers wearing bright yellow shirts. There were pamphlets everywhere, statistics about kids waiting for homes and photos of smiling children on poster boards. Rebecca picked up a brochure and started reading. More than 400,000 kids in foster care. Thousands aging out of the system every year without ever finding a family. The numbers made her chest tight. Then she saw him. He was sitting alone in the corner of the room, away from all the noise and activity. 15 years old, wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head, headphones around his neck. While other kids at the event were talking to potential foster parents or playing games, he sat there with his arms crossed, staring at his phone. Something about him caught her attention. Maybe it was how separate he seemed from everything happening around him. Maybe it was the way he'd built an invisible wall between himself and the rest of the world. Rebecca couldn't look away. She walked over to the volunteer coordinator and asked about him. "Oh, that's David," the woman said, her voice dropping to a softer tone. "He's been in the system for 7 years now. Sweet kid, but he's had a rough time. Been through 6 different placements." "6?" Rebecca repeated. The coordinator nodded sadly. "It's not uncommon with the older kids. Most families want babies or young children. By the time they're teenagers, especially if they've been in the system for a while, it becomes really hard to place them. David's a good kid, really. He just doesn't trust easily anymore." Can you blame him? Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about that. 6 homes. 6 times someone had said they'd take care of him, and 6 times it hadn't worked out. She wondered what that did to a person, especially a kid. She spent the rest of the morning at the event, but her eyes kept drifting back to David. At one point, their eyes met across the room. He looked at her for just a second before looking away, his expression unreadable. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about David sitting alone in that corner. She thought about all those placements that hadn't worked out, about what it must feel like to be 15 years old and convinced that nobody wanted you. By Monday morning, she'd made up her mind. She called the foster care agency. Her friends thought she was crazy. "Rebecca, are you serious?" her best friend Lisa said over coffee. "A teenager? You know how hard that's going to be, right? They have so many issues by that age." "He's not an issue," Rebecca said quietly. "He's a kid who needs someone. But why not start with a younger child? Or even foster to adopt with a baby? You've always wanted—" "I know what I've always wanted," Rebecca interrupted. "But maybe what I wanted and what I meant to do are 2 different things." The agency process took months. There were background checks, home studies, training classes, and mountains of paperwork. Rebecca learned about trauma, attachment disorders, and the complex needs of teenagers in foster care. The trainers were honest, sometimes brutally so, about the challenges ahead. "These kids have been hurt," one trainer explained. "They've learned that adults can't be trusted, that homes aren't permanent, and that opening up only leads to more pain. They will test you. They will push you away. They will do everything they can to prove that you'll give up on them too, because in their experience, everyone always does." Rebecca listened to all of it. She heard the warnings, understood the risks, and kept moving forward anyway. 6 months after that first meeting at the community center, Rebecca stood in her spare bedroom, looking at the space she'd prepared for David. She'd painted the walls a calm blue-gray color. There was a new bed, a desk for homework, and empty shelves waiting to be filled with his things. She'd tried not to overdo it, didn't want it to feel like she was trying too hard. Her hands were shaking. The social worker had called 2 days ago. David had agreed to the placement. Rebecca didn't know if he actually wanted to live with her, or if he'd just run out of other options. She suspected it was probably the latter. When the doorbell rang, Rebecca took a deep breath and opened the door. David stood there with a single backpack and a garbage bag containing the rest of his belongings. The social worker, Mrs. Chen, stood beside him with an encouraging smile. "Hi, David," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Welcome home," he didn't respond. Didn't smile. Just walked past her into the house, his shoulders hunched, his eyes scanning everything like he was already planning his exit strategy. Mrs. Chen gave Rebecca a sympathetic look. "Call me if you need anything," she whispered. And then she was gone, and Rebecca was alone with this guarded, hurt teenage boy who had every reason not to trust her. This was really happening. Rebecca closed the door and turned to find David standing in the middle of the living room, still holding his garbage bag, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I made dinner." "I'm fine," he muttered. "Okay, well, let me show you your room." She led him upstairs, feeling the weight of his silence behind her. When she opened the door to his new bedroom, he glanced around without expression. "Bathroom's right across the hall," Rebecca said. "You can arrange things however you want in here. It's your space." David dropped his bag on the floor. "Can I close the door?" "Of course." He shut the door without another word. Rebecca stood in the hallway, listening to the silence, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. Wondering if love could really be enough to reach a kid who'd been let down so many times before. She didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of the hardest and most beautiful journey of her life. The first week was quiet. Too quiet. David went to school, came home, went straight to his room and stayed there. He came down for dinner only when Rebecca called him multiple times, ate quickly without talking, and disappeared again. He was polite in the way someone is polite to a stranger, distant and careful. Every interaction felt like he was just going through the motions until this placement inevitably ended like all the others. Rebecca tried everything she could think of. She cooked his favorite foods, or at least what the social worker had told her he liked. She asked about school, about his day, about anything that might get him to open up. His answers were always the same. It was fine. Nothing much. I'm good. She felt like she was trying to hug a wall. By the second week, things got harder. David started testing boundaries. He'd come home late without calling. When Rebecca asked where he'd been, he'd shrug and say he lost track of time. She'd set a rule about homework before video games, and he'd ignore it. When she tried to enforce consequences, he'd just stare at her with those cold, unreadable eyes and say, "Whatever." Rebecca's patience was wearing thin, but she kept reminding herself what the trainers had said. This is normal. He's testing you. He's waiting for you to give up. She refused to give up. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night 3 weeks after David had moved in. Rebecca had made dinner, called him down, and waited. He didn't come. She called again. Nothing. When she went upstairs and knocked on his door, he yelled that he wasn't hungry. "David, please come down," Rebecca said through the door. "We need to eat together." I said, "I'm not hungry. It's important to me that we—" The door flew open. David's face was red, his fists clenched at his sides. "Why do you even care? Stop pretending like this is some real family. You're just another person getting paid to let me stay here until you get tired of dealing with me." The words hit Rebecca like a slap. "David, that's not— Save it. I've heard it all before. We're so happy to have you. This is your home now. It's all garbage. You'll get sick of me just like everyone else, so why don't we just skip the fake nice part?" He slammed the door so hard a picture frame fell off the hallway wall. Rebecca stood there, her heart pounding. She wanted to cry. She wanted to open that door and make him understand that she wasn't like the others, that she meant what she said. But she also knew that nothing she could say right now would make a difference, so she went downstairs, wrapped up the dinner she'd made, and put it in the refrigerator. Then she sat at the table alone and let herself cry. The next few weeks were a cycle of the same patterns. David pushed, Rebecca held firm. He broke curfew, she set consequences. He ignored the rules, she enforced them calmly. She never yelled, never threatened to send him away, never gave him the reaction he seemed to be looking for. But inside, Rebecca was breaking. She'd come home from work exhausted and find dirty dishes left out, homework not done, and David locked in his room playing video games. She'd lie awake at night wondering if she was failing him, if she was the wrong person for this, if maybe everyone had been right when they'd said this was too hard. One night, after a particularly difficult day, she sat in her car in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. She'd called David's school earlier because he'd skipped 3 classes. The vice principal had been sympathetic but firm. David was smart, they said, but he wasn't trying. If things didn't improve, he might not pass the semester. When Rebecca confronted him about it, he'd just shrugged. So what? Who cares? I care. Rebecca had shouted, losing her composure. I care about your future. I care about your education. I care about you. David had laughed, a bitter sound that made her chest ache. Right, sure you do. Now, sitting in her car, Rebecca wiped her tears and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Lisa's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. She wanted to talk to someone, to admit that maybe she'd been wrong, maybe this was too much, but she didn't call. Instead, she put the phone away, took a deep breath, and went inside. David wasn't in his room. His backpack was on the couch, but he was nowhere in the house. Rebecca called his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. She checked the backyard, the garage, everywhere. He was gone, panic set in. She called again, nothing. She sent texts. David, where are you? Please let me know you're okay. I'm not mad, just worried. No response. Rebecca paced the living room, her mind racing through terrible possibilities. Should she call the police? The social worker? What if something had happened to him? What if he'd run away for good this time? She made herself sit down. She remembered what Mrs. Chen had told her during training. Sometimes these kids run. Sometimes they need to know that you'll still be there when they come back. So Rebecca waited. She sat on the front porch as the sun went down and the streetlights came on. She waited through the evening news and into the night. Her phone stayed in her hand, checking every few minutes for messages that didn't come. At 11:30, she saw a figure walking down the street. Even in the darkness, she recognized David's walk, that slouched posture, hands in his pockets. He was soaking wet from the rain that had started an hour ago. Rebecca stood up but didn't walk toward him. She just waited. David stopped at the edge of the driveway when he saw her. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. He seemed surprised that she was there, sitting outside in the cold, waiting for him. I thought you'd be asleep, he said finally, his voice rough. I was waiting for you, Rebecca said simply. Why? Because you live here. Because I was worried about you. David laughed that bitter laugh again, but it sounded weaker this time. You should just call my social worker. Tell her this isn't working. We both know that's where this is headed. Rebecca walked down the porch steps slowly. She stopped a few feet away from him. Is that what you want? For me to give up? I don't care what you do, he said, but his voice cracked. I think you do care, Rebecca said softly. I think you care a lot, and that scares you. David's jaw clenched. You don't know anything about me. You're right. I don't, but I want to. And I'm not going anywhere, David. No matter how hard you push, no matter how many times you test me, I'm staying. This is your home now. For real. You can't promise that, he whispered, and Rebecca heard the pain underneath the anger. Nobody can promise that. I just did. They stood there in the rain, and Rebecca saw something shift in David's expression. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the smallest crack in that wall he'd built around himself. His shoulders started to shake, and she realized he was crying. Rebecca didn't ask permission. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He stood rigid for a moment, then collapsed against her, sobbing into her shoulder like he'd been holding it in for years. They stood there in the rain while David cried, and Rebecca held him tight and whispered, I've got you. I'm not letting go. When they finally went inside, both soaking wet and exhausted, Rebecca grabbed towels from the bathroom. She handed one to David, and he took it without looking at her. Are you hungry? She asked. I can heat up some dinner. He nodded, still not meeting her eyes. They sat at the kitchen table while the microwave hummed. David wrapped in a towel, his hair dripping. Rebecca in her wet jacket, too tired to change. When the food was ready, they ate in silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't the cold, distant silence of the past few weeks. It was softer somehow, less empty. I'm sorry, David said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. For what? For being such a pain. For making this so hard. Rebecca reached across the table and touched his hand. You're not a pain, David. You're a kid who's been hurt. And that's okay. We'll figure this out together. He finally looked up at her, and his eyes were red from crying. What if I can't? What if I'm too messed up? You're not messed up, Rebecca said firmly. You're surviving. And now you don't have to survive alone anymore. Something changed between them that night. David didn't suddenly become easy to live with. He still had bad days, still pushed boundaries, still struggled with trust, but he stopped waiting for Rebecca to give up. He started very slowly to believe that maybe this time could be different, and Rebecca learned that love wasn't just about the sweet moments. It was about showing up in the rain. It was about waiting on the porch. It was about holding on when everything in you wanted to let go. This was just the beginning of their real journey together. Things got better after that rainy night, but progress came in small steps. David started coming down for dinner without being called 3 times. He'd occasionally tell Rebecca about something that happened at school. Sometimes he'd even laugh at her jokes, though he'd try to hide it. But Rebecca could tell he was still holding back. There was a part of him that remained locked away, protected behind walls built from years of disappointment. She wanted to reach that part of him, but she didn't know how. 4 months after David moved in, Rebecca got a call from school. Her stomach dropped when she saw the number. Calls from school were never good news. "Mrs. Henderson?" The vice principal said. "This is Mr. Roberts. I need you to come pick up David. There's been an incident." Rebecca's heart raced. "Is he hurt? What happened?" "He's fine physically, but he was involved in a fight. We need you here as soon as possible." During the drive to school, Rebecca's mind spun with possibilities. David had been doing so much better lately. His grades were improving. He seemed calmer at home. What could have happened? When she arrived at the office, she found David sitting outside the principal's office, his knuckles red and swollen, his shirt torn at the shoulder. A bruise was forming under his left eye. He wouldn't look at her. Across the waiting area sat another boy, bigger than David, with his parents. The boy had a bloody nose and was holding an ice pack to his face. His mother glared at David with pure anger. Mr. Roberts led Rebecca into his office. David followed, slouching in his chair and staring at the floor. "What happened?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep her voice calm even though her hands were shaking. Mr. Roberts sighed. According to witnesses, David attacked Tyler Jackson in the hallway between classes. Several students saw him throw the first punch. "That's not what happened," David said suddenly, his voice tight. Multiple students said, "I don't care what they said. They don't know why it happened." "David," Rebecca said gently, "tell us what happened. The whole story." He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw clenched. Then he looked up, and Rebecca saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not anger, pain. Tyler was picking on this kid, a 7th grader named Chris. Small kid, quiet, minds his own business. Tyler and his friends corner him sometimes, take his lunch money, knock his books out of his hands. Today they were pushing him around and Chris was trying not to cry. David's voice cracked. "I told them to leave him alone." Tyler laughed and pushed Chris again, so I pushed Tyler back. "And then—" "Yeah, I hit him. He deserved it." Mr. Roberts rubbed his forehead. "David, I understand you were trying to help, but violence has never—" "Where were the teachers?" Rebecca interrupted. "If this has been going on, if this Tyler has been bullying a younger student, why hasn't anyone stopped it?" Mr. Roberts looked uncomfortable. "We can't monitor every hallway every moment of the day. But you can suspend the kid who tried to stop it." "Rebecca, I appreciate that David's intentions may have been good, but school policy is clear. Fighting results in a 3-day suspension for both students involved." David laughed bitterly. "Of course. Tyler's been torturing that kid for months, but I'm the one who gets in trouble for stopping it." In the car on the way home, David stared out the window, his jaw tight. Rebecca glanced at him, noticing how his hands were clenched in his lap. "Does your hand hurt?" she asked. "It's fine. We should probably ice it when we get home." I said it's fine. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Rebecca said quietly, "Thank you." David turned to look at her, confused. "For what?" "Getting suspended. For standing up for that boy. For being brave enough to help someone who couldn't help themselves. I still got in trouble." "I know. And that's frustrating. But what you did, protecting someone smaller than you, that took courage. I'm proud of you." David's face crumpled. He turned back to the window quickly, but Rebecca saw him wipe his eyes. When they got home, Rebecca made David sit at the kitchen table while she got ice for his hand. She wrapped it in a dish towel and gently pressed it to his swollen knuckles. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Really?" David was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Chris reminds me of someone." "Who?" His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "My little brother." Rebecca's breath caught. She knew from David's file that he had siblings, that they'd been separated in the foster system. But he'd never mentioned them before, never talked about his past at all. "Tell me about him," she said gently. David stared at the table. "His name is Tommy. He's 4 years younger than me. When we got taken away from our mom, they split us up. I went to one home, he went to another. I tried to take care of him before that. After our dad left, Mom started using drugs. She'd forget to feed us, forget to pick us up from school. I'd steal food from the gas station to make sure Tommy ate." Tears started rolling down David's face. The night they took us, Mom had been gone for 2 days. Tommy was so hungry he was crying.
"I called 911 because I didn't know what else to do."
I thought they'd help us. I thought they'd keep us together. Rebecca felt her own eyes filling with tears. But they didn't. David continued, his voice breaking. "They said it was better to split us up, that they didn't have a home that could take both of us. I screamed and fought, but they took Tommy anyway. He was crying for me, reaching out. He was only 6 years old and he was so scared." "Oh, David," Rebecca whispered. "I failed him," David said, sobbing now. "I was supposed to protect him and I couldn't. That was 7 years ago and I haven't seen him since. I don't even know where he is. When I saw Tyler pushing Chris around, all I could think about was Tommy. I couldn't help my brother, but maybe I could help this kid." Rebecca moved her chair closer and pulled David into her arms. He clung to her and cried like a little boy, not the tough teenager he tried so hard to be. "You didn't fail, Tommy," Rebecca said firmly. "You were a child yourself. You did everything you could. The system failed both of you." "I miss him so much," David said through his tears. "What if he thinks I forgot about him? What if he's in a bad place and no one's taking care of him?" Rebecca held him tighter, her mind racing. She thought about that file sitting in her desk drawer, about the information she'd read months ago about David's family, about a younger brother named Tommy, last known to be in foster care in a neighboring county. "David," she said carefully, "what if we tried to find him?" David pulled back and looked at her, his eyes red and hopeful. "What? Your brother? What if we tried to find Tommy? I can contact the agency, see what's possible. I can't promise anything, but we can try. You'd do that?" David's voice was small, disbelieving. "Of course I would. Tommy is your family. That matters." For the first time since he'd moved in, David really smiled. Not a smirk or a half grin, but a real, genuine smile full of hope. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." That night, after David went to bed, Rebecca sat at her computer and started making calls. She left messages with social workers, contacted family services in the neighboring county, and sent emails to everyone she could think of who might be able to help. Finding Tommy wouldn't be easy. The system was complicated, privacy laws were strict, and there was no guarantee they'd be able to make contact. But Rebecca had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. Over the next few days, David was different. He still had his moody moments, still struggled with trust. But there was something new in his eyes. Hope. He'd check with Rebecca every day, asking if she'd heard anything about Tommy. "Not yet," she'd say, "but I'm still trying. I won't give up." A week later, Rebecca got a call from Mrs. Chen, their social worker. "I have information about Tommy," Mrs. Chen said. "It took some digging, but I found him." Rebecca's heart pounded. "Where is he?" "He's in a group home about 40 miles from you. He's 13 now. Rebecca, I have to warn you, his situation isn't great. He's been in and out of placements, some behavioral issues. This is going to be complicated. Can we see him? Can David see him? I can arrange a supervised visit. But I need you to prepare David. This might not go the way he's hoping. 7 years is a long time." When Rebecca told David that night, he broke down crying again. But this time they were happy tears mixed with fear. "What if he doesn't remember me?" David asked. "What if he hates me for not finding him sooner?" "He could never hate you," Rebecca said, holding his face in her hands. "You're his big brother. You loved him then and you love him now. That's what matters." 2 weeks later, they drove to the group home where Tommy was staying. David was so nervous he could barely sit still. He'd changed his shirt 3 times that morning and kept asking Rebecca if he looked okay. "You look perfect," she assured him. "He's going to be so happy to see you." But as they pulled up to the building, a plain brick structure that looked more like a hospital than a home, Rebecca saw David's expression change. This wasn't the happy reunion he'd been imagining. This was real, and it was scary. Mrs. Chen met them in the lobby. Remember, she said gently to David, take it slow. Let Tommy set the pace. They were led to a small meeting room with a table and some chairs. It looked like every other institutional room Rebecca had ever seen. Cold. Impersonal. Nothing like a home. And then the door opened, and a teenage boy walked in. David stood up so fast he almost knocked over his chair. Tommy? The boy stopped, his eyes wide. He was tall for 13, skinny with the same dark hair and brown eyes as David. For a long moment, the brothers just stared at each other, 7 years of separation hanging between them. Then Tommy whispered, David, is that really you? David nodded, unable to speak. Tommy's face crumpled and he ran across the room. The brothers collided in the middle, holding onto each other like they were afraid the other might disappear. Both of them were crying, and Rebecca couldn't stop her own tears. I thought I'd never see you again, Tommy sobbed. I thought you forgot about me. Never, David said fiercely. I never forgot. I never stopped looking. I'm so sorry it took so long. They held each other and cried, and Rebecca watched this beautiful, heartbreaking reunion, knowing that their journey was far from over. But they'd found each other again. After 7 years, these brothers who'd been torn apart were together again, and that was everything. The reunion between David and Tommy changed everything. After that first meeting, Rebecca arranged regular visits. Every other weekend, they'd drive to the group home, and David would spend hours with his little brother. They'd play basketball in the outdoor court, talk about everything and nothing, and just be together. But every time they had to say goodbye, it got harder. Rebecca would watch David's face fall as they drove away, see him staring out the window in silence, lost in thoughts he didn't share. Tommy would stand at the window of the group home, watching their car disappear, looking small and alone. It wasn't enough. Rebecca knew it, and the boys knew it too. One night, about 2 months after the first reunion, David came to Rebecca's room. She was reading in bed when she heard a soft knock. Come in, she said. David stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. Can I talk to you? Of course, always. He sat on the edge of her bed, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. I've been thinking about Tommy. I know. Me too. David looked up at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. What if... He paused, took a deep breath. What if Tommy could live here? With us? Rebecca's heart squeezed. She'd been thinking about the same thing for weeks, but hadn't known how to bring it up. You want Tommy to come live with us? I know it's a lot to ask, David said quickly. And I know you didn't sign up for 2 kids. But he hates it at that group home. He told me some of the other kids are mean to him, and the staff doesn't really care. He has nightmares and no one's there. I just keep thinking about him alone in that place, and it makes me feel sick. David, Rebecca said gently, I've actually been looking into it. His head snapped up. What, really? Really. I contacted Mrs. Chen a few weeks ago to ask about the possibility. It's complicated, but it's not impossible. Tommy would need to be willing. His current placement would need to agree, and there would be a lot of paperwork and home studies. But if everyone agrees, we could try. David's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that? Take both of us? David, do you remember that night you came home in the rain? When you asked me if I was going to give up on you? He nodded. I told you that you have a home here, that you're family. That hasn't changed. And Tommy is your family, which means he's my family too. If we can bring him here, I want to. David threw his arms around Rebecca, hugging her tight. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you so much. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Rebecca hugged him back, her own tears falling. You're pretty great yourself, kid. The next day, Rebecca called Mrs. Chen and started the formal process. She learned that Tommy had been in the group home for 8 months, his 3rd placement in the past 2 years. His file showed behavioral problems, difficulty with authority, and troublemaking friends. The social workers painted a picture of a troubled kid who'd been passed around too many times, but Rebecca saw past that. She saw a 13-year-old boy who'd lost his family, who'd been separated from the one person he loved most, and who'd learned to protect himself by pushing others away first. She saw David 7 years ago. I want to meet with Tommy, Rebecca told Mrs. Chen. Alone without David there. I want to talk to him and make sure this is what he wants. A week later, Rebecca sat in that same meeting room at the group home, waiting. Her hands were sweating. This conversation would determine everything. Tommy came in looking guarded. He sat down across from her, arms crossed, not meeting her eyes. So much like David had been. "Hi, Tommy," Rebecca said warmly. "I'm Rebecca. It's good to officially meet you." "David's foster mom," Tommy said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and hopefully soon I'll be more than that. I wanted to talk to you about something important." Tommy looked up, suspicious. "What?" "David and I have been talking, and we'd like you to come live with us. Not for a visit, permanently. We want you to be part of our family." Tommy stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Why?" "Because you're David's brother. Because David loves you and has been looking for you for 7 years. And because everyone deserves a real home with people who care about them." "You don't even know me," Tommy said, his voice hard. "Why would you want some random kid living in your house?" "You're not some random kid. You're important to David, which makes you important to me." Tommy laughed bitterly. So much like David, it made Rebecca's heart ache. Everyone says stuff like that. Then they get tired of dealing with me and send me somewhere else. It's what always happens. "I understand why you'd think that," Rebecca said gently. "You've been let down a lot. But I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm just asking you to give us a chance. What if I mess up? What if I'm too difficult? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what families do." Tommy's eyes were shiny with unshed tears. "I have problems. My file says I have behavioral issues and anger management stuff. The people here say I'm difficult. You know what else I see when I look at your file?" Rebecca said. "I see a boy who had to grow up too fast, who lost his family and had to survive on his own, who's been moved around so many times he stopped believing anyone would stay. Those aren't problems, Tommy, those are survival skills. And you won't need them anymore because you won't be surviving alone." A tear rolled down Tommy's cheek. "David really wants me to come? More than anything. And you want me to? You're not just doing this because David asked." Rebecca reached across the table and took Tommy's hand. "I want you to. I promise," Tommy broke down crying, his shoulders shaking. "I missed him so much. I missed my brother so much, I know. And you'll never have to miss him again." The process took 3 months. There were meetings with social workers, psychological evaluations, and a new home study to ensure Rebecca's house was suitable for 2 teenage boys. David's grades improved even more as he had something to work toward. He cleaned his room without being asked, helped around the house, and was on his best behavior. "I want everything to be perfect when Tommy gets here," he told Rebecca. "It doesn't have to be perfect," she assured him. "It just has to be home." Finally, the day came. Rebecca and David drove to the group home one last time to bring Tommy home for good. Tommy was waiting outside with his belongings, just like David had been 9 months earlier, a backpack and 2 garbage bags. When Tommy saw David get out of the car, his face lit up with the biggest smile Rebecca had ever seen. The brothers hugged, both grinning. "Ready to come home?" David asked. "I've been ready my whole life," Tommy said. The drive back was different from when David had first come home. Tommy chattered nervously about school, about his favorite foods, about whether they had good Wi-Fi. David answered every question patiently, clearly excited to have his brother with him. When they pulled into the driveway, David said, "Come on, I'll show you our room." "Our room?" Tommy asked. "Yeah, if you want. I cleaned up the other bedroom for you, but I thought maybe you'd want to share. At least at first. We have bunk beds." Tommy's eyes filled with tears again. "You want to share a room with me?" "Of course. We've been apart for 7 years. I'm not ready to have a wall between us yet." Rebecca stood in the doorway of the bedroom that evening, watching the brothers arrange Tommy's things. David was showing Tommy where everything was, explaining the house rules, talking about what school would be like. Tommy listened with wide eyes, occasionally asking questions, clearly overwhelmed but happy. "Hey, Rebecca," Tommy called out. "Yeah? Thank you. For letting me be here. For wanting me." "You don't have to thank me, Tommy. This is your home now." That night, Rebecca heard soft talking coming from the boys' room long after bedtime. She walked quietly down the hall and stood outside the door, listening. "Do you think this is real?" Tommy was asking. "Do you think she'll really keep us?" "She will," David said with certainty. "I didn't believe it at first either. But Rebecca is different. She doesn't give up. She waited for me in the rain when I ran away. She found you when I thought I'd never see you again. She chose us, Tommy, both of us." "I'm scared," Tommy admitted. "What if I mess this up?" "You won't, and if you have a bad day, so what?" "I had a lot of bad days. I was awful to her at first, and she stayed anyway. She's not going anywhere." There was a pause, then Tommy said quietly, I love you, David. I never stopped. I love you too, little brother. We're going to be okay now, I promise. Rebecca wiped her tears and went back to her room. She lay in bed thinking about how much had changed in less than a year. How she'd gone from being alone to having 2 teenage sons. How her house had gone from quiet to filled with life and noise and teenage boy chaos. It wasn't perfect. Tommy struggled in school and had nightmares for the first few weeks. David still had moments where his old walls went up. There were arguments and slammed doors and typical teenage drama. But there was also laughter. Inside jokes. The sound of the brothers playing video games together. Tommy yelling, "David, come look at this." David teaching Tommy to cook scrambled eggs. Both boys sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while Rebecca made dinner. One evening, about a month after Tommy moved in, Rebecca was washing dishes when she heard Tommy call from the living room. "Hey, Mom, can you help me with this math problem?" The house went silent. Tommy's eyes went wide as he realized what he'd said. David looked up from his homework, grinning. Rebecca dried her hands on a towel, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Of course," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Let me see what you're working on." She sat down next to Tommy, who looked at her nervously. "Is it okay that I called you that?" Rebecca pulled him into a hug. "It's more than okay. It's perfect." David joined the hug, wrapping his arms around both of them. "We're really a family now, aren't we?" "We've been a family," Rebecca said, "from the moment I decided to take a chance on a guarded 15-year-old boy sitting alone at a foster care event. Family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. It's about staying, and we're all here staying together." That night after the boys went to bed, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. She thought about how different her life looked from what she'd imagined. She'd wanted to adopt a baby, to start from the beginning. Instead, she'd been given 2 teenage boys with trauma and trust issues and complicated pasts. She'd been given late-night talks and school problems and behavioral challenges. She'd been given fear and anger and walls that seemed impossible to climb. But she'd also been given laughter and inside jokes and the incredible privilege of watching 2 brothers reunite. She'd been given the chance to show 2 kids who'd been let down over and over that someone would finally stay. She'd been given a family, and it was better than anything she could have imagined. 2 years passed, and the Henderson house had become something none of them had expected. It was noisy and chaotic and wonderful. The refrigerator was always empty because teenage boys ate constantly. There were shoes by the door and backpacks on the couch and video game controllers scattered everywhere. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. David was 17 now, a senior in high school. He'd grown taller, filled out, and carried himself with a confidence that hadn't been there before. He was on the basketball team, had a small group of close friends, and was looking at colleges. When Rebecca watched him walk across the stage at awards night to accept a scholarship certificate, she cried proud tears. Tommy was 15 and thriving. He'd caught up in school, made the honor roll last semester, and was in the drama club. He still had rough days, moments where the old fear and anger bubbled up, but he'd learned to talk about it instead of letting it explode. The adoption had been finalized 8 months after Tommy moved in. Rebecca remembered that day in court, standing between both boys, all of them holding hands. When the judge declared them legally a family, David and Tommy had both broken down crying. So had Rebecca. Now they had family movie nights every Friday. They had inside jokes and embarrassing stories. They had arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash and debates about what to have for dinner. They had all the normal, ordinary, beautiful chaos of being a family. But Rebecca knew there was still one piece missing from their story. One piece that needed to be told. She'd been thinking about it for months, and finally, one Saturday morning in April, she brought it up over breakfast. "I got an email yesterday," Rebecca said casually, flipping pancakes, "from a woman named Patricia Rodriguez. She organizes the annual foster care awareness event downtown." David looked up from his plate. "The event where we met?" "The very same. She wants to know if we'd be willing to speak at this year's event. To share our story." Tommy stopped mid-bite. "Speak, like in front of people?" "A lot of people," Rebecca admitted. "It's the biggest foster care event in the state." She said our story could really help, both for potential foster parents and for kids in the system who need hope. David and Tommy exchanged glances. "I don't know," David said slowly. "That's pretty personal stuff. I understand if you're not comfortable, Rebecca said. I told her I'd need to talk to you both first. This would have to be a family decision. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then said, What would we even say? The truth, Rebecca said simply. About how hard it was at first. About the struggles and the breakthroughs. About finding each other again. About becoming a family. Why would anyone want to hear that? David asked. Rebecca sat down at the table with them. Because there are hundreds of teenagers in foster care right now who think they're too old, too damaged, too difficult for anyone to want them. And there are potential foster parents out there who are afraid to take a chance on older kids because they think it's too hard. Our story proves that it's possible. That it's worth it. David looked at Tommy. What do you think? Tommy chewed his lip, thinking. I think about all those years I was alone in that group home. How I thought David had forgotten about me. How I thought I'd never have a real family. If someone had told me back then that this, he gestured around the kitchen, was possible, maybe it would have been easier. Maybe I would have had hope. So you want to do it? David asked. I think we should. Don't you? David was quiet, and Rebecca could see him wrestling with something. Finally, he said, I was so angry for so long. I pushed you away so hard when you first took me in. I said terrible things. Are you sure you want people to know how awful I was? Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand. David, you weren't awful. You were hurt. And the fact that we made it through that together, that's the whole point. That's what people need to hear. Okay, David said, squeezing her hand. Let's do it. The event was 3 weeks away. Rebecca helped the boys prepare, but she insisted they tell the story in their own words. They practiced in the living room, taking turns speaking, figuring out who would say what. Tommy got nervous and had to start over several times. David's voice would crack when he talked about the years he'd been separated from his brother. Rebecca cried during every practice run. We're a mess, David laughed after one particularly emotional practice session. We're real, Rebecca corrected, and that's exactly what makes this story matter. The day of the event arrived. The community center was packed with people. Potential foster parents, social workers, current foster kids, and community supporters filled every seat. Rebecca, David, and Tommy sat backstage, all three of them nervous. What if I forget what to say? Tommy whispered. Then you just speak from the heart, Rebecca said. That's all any of us can do. When Patricia introduced them, the three of them walked onto the small stage together. Rebecca stood between her sons, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the microphone. 3 years ago, Rebecca began, I came to this exact event thinking I knew what I wanted. I wanted to adopt a baby. I wanted to start from the beginning. Have someone who didn't come with a complicated past or trust issues or trauma. She paused, looking at David. And then I met a 15-year-old boy sitting alone in the corner. He was guarded and angry, and had been through 6 foster placements. Everyone told me it would be too hard, that teenage adoptions rarely work, that I should reconsider. She didn't listen, David said, taking the microphone. His voice was steady, stronger than Rebecca expected. I made it really hard for her at first. I tested every boundary. I broke curfew. I told her she was wasting her time, that I'd end up leaving like I always did. I waited for her to give up on me. He looked at Rebecca, his eyes shining. But she didn't. Even when I ran away in the rain, she waited on the porch for me to come home. She showed me that someone could stay even when staying was hard. Tommy took the microphone next, his hands trembling. I'm David's little brother. We got separated 7 years ago when we went into foster care. I was 6 years old. I spent years thinking my brother had forgotten about me. I was in 3 different group homes and I thought I'd never have a real family. His voice cracked. But David never forgot about me. And when Rebecca adopted him, one of the first things they did was start looking for me. They found me and Rebecca said I could come live with them too. She chose both of us, even though we came with a lot of problems. Rebecca took the microphone again. I won't lie to you. It was hard. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was the right person for this. There were fights and slammed doors and moments where I questioned everything. She looked at her sons with so much love. But there were also breakthroughs, small victories. The first time David called me Mom, the way these brothers held each other when they reunited after 7 years apart, family dinners and inside jokes and watching them become who they were always meant to be. We're not a perfect family, David said. We still have hard days. Tommy and I both still deal with stuff from our past. We see therapists. We have moments where the old fears come back. But we're a real family, Tommy added, and that's better than perfect. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she spoke again. If you're here today thinking about fostering or adopting, especially a teenager, I want you to know something. It will be hard. It will challenge you in ways you can't imagine. But it will also be the most rewarding thing you ever do. She put her arms around both boys. These are my sons. Not because I gave birth to them, but because I chose them and they chose me back. Because we did the hard work together. Because we learned that family isn't about biology or perfection. It's about showing up even when it's difficult. It's about staying even when you want to run. It's about believing that love can heal even the deepest wounds. David took the microphone one more time. If you're a kid in foster care right now, I want you to know that your story isn't over. I know it feels hopeless sometimes. I know you've probably been let down before. But your family is out there. Someone who will see past the walls you've built. Someone who will wait for you in the rain. Someone who won't give up. You're not too old, Tommy said. You're not too damaged. You're not too anything. You're exactly who you're supposed to be, and you deserve a family that sees that. The room was silent for a moment, and then the applause started. It grew louder and louder until the entire room was on their feet. Rebecca saw people wiping their eyes. She saw teenagers in foster care crying. She saw potential foster parents looking at each other with new determination. After they left the stage, several people came up to thank them. One woman, probably in her 50s, grabbed Rebecca's hands. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "My husband and I have been considering fostering, but we were scared to take teenagers. Your story changed my mind. We're going to do it." A teenage girl, maybe 16, approached David shyly. "I've been in foster care for 3 years. I thought no one would ever want me because I'm too old. But you gave me hope." "Thank you," David hugged her. "Don't give up. Your family is out there." On the drive home, they were all emotionally exhausted but happy. "That was intense," Tommy said from the back seat. "Yeah," David agreed. "But good, right?" "Really good," Tommy confirmed. Rebecca glanced in the rearview mirror at her sons. "I'm proud of you both. That took a lot of courage." "We learned from the best," David said, smiling at her. That evening, they had their usual Friday movie night. Tommy made popcorn while David argued with Rebecca about which movie to watch. They ended up watching some superhero film that Rebecca didn't really follow. But she didn't care. She was too busy watching her sons throw popcorn at each other and quote movie lines, and just be the teenagers they deserved to be. Later that night, after the boys went to bed, Rebecca sat on the porch with a cup of tea. She thought about that day 3 years ago when she'd met David, how scared she'd been, how uncertain. She thought about all the hard moments since then. The fights, the tears, the moments of doubt. She thought about finding Tommy, bringing him home, watching these brothers become whole again. She thought about how different her life looked from what she'd planned, how much bigger, messier, and more beautiful it was than anything she could have imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Even though he was just upstairs, he'd sent her a message. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to say thanks for everything. For not giving up on me, for finding Tommy, for making us a family. You changed our lives. Love you." Rebecca wiped her eyes and typed back, "You changed mine, too. Love you both more than you'll ever know." She heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see David and Tommy coming down, both in their pajamas. "We couldn't sleep," Tommy said. "Wanted to hang out for a bit," David added. They sat on either side of her on the porch, these two boys who were now taller than her, who still needed her even though they tried to act grown up.